Execution by firing squad has been one of the most recognisable forms of capital punishment in modern history. From Napoleonic France to the American Civil War, and from the First World War to the Cold War, the firing squad has been used by states and armies to carry out death sentences. It was often chose for crimes such as treason, mutiny, desertion, espionage, or wartime atrocities, and in some countries it remained the preferred method for military personnel long after hanging or the electric chair became standardised for civilians. Despite its grim reputation, the firing squad followed a highly organised process meant to appear quick, decisive, and at least on the surface more honourable than other methods of execution. The practice of shooting condemned individuals began with the introduction of firearms in European armies. By the 17th and 18th centuries, it had become an accepted military punishment. Hanging was thought of as a criminal's death, while shooting was seen as more suitable for soldiers. In France under Napoleon, for example, soldiers convicted of desertion or treason were shot, while civilians were guillotined. Many nations adopted this distinction, which is why firing squads became closely linked with military justice. Even in the 20th century, the firing squad remained in use. In Britain during the First World War, around 300 soldiers were executed by firing squad for desertion, mutiny, and other offences. In the United States, the last federal execution by firing squad was in 1961 of Army Private John A. Bennett in Kansas, and in Utah, the method persisted into the 21st century. A firing squad execution typically began long before the day of the shooting. The condemned person would be tried by a court, often a military tribunal, and if found guilty, sentenced to death. In many armies, the execution was scheduled at dawn. The timing was partly practical, allowing it to be completed before the day's operations began, and partly symbolic, the start of a new day without the condemned soldier. On the morning of the execution, the condemned person was awoken early and offered a final meal or the services of a chaplain. Sometimes they were allowed to write a final letter or to make a brief statement. The prisoner was then escorted to the place of execution, often a parade ground, a secluded courtyard, or just a field outside the camp or town. The place of execution was chosen for visibility and discipline. In many armies, other soldiers were ordered to watch as a warning against misconduct. In the British Army during the First World War, however, executions were done in relative secrecy to avoid demoralising the troops. A chair or a post was often placed at the centre of the site. The condemned might be tied to the post or seated, especially if they were wounded or likely to collapse. A blindfold was also usually offered. Some accepted it, whilst others refused, preferring to face their shooters. The squad itself usually consisted of between 6 to 12 soldiers. This was enough to ensure death and to spread the responsibility so that no single man could be certain of firing the fatal shot. One or more of the rifles would be loaded with blanks, a tradition intended to ease the psychological burden on the shooters. Each could imagine that he might not have killed the prisoner. The soldiers were typically selected from the same unit, but might be drawn from a different one to reduce personal ties. In many cases, the squad was commanded by an officer who gave the orders to aim and fire. The officer might also carry a pistol to deliver a coup de grace, a gunshot to the heart or head, if the prisoner was still alive after the initial volley. Once everyone was in position, the officer in charge would give the commands. The sequence was usually ready. The squad raised their rifles. Aim. They took aim at the condemned's chest, usually aiming towards the heart, and then fire. All fired simultaneously, on command. Aiming at the chest rather than the head increased the chance of a swift death. In most cases, the prisoner died instantly or within seconds from massive blood loss or shock. If the prisoner survived, the commanding officer was expected to step forward and fire a close-range shot to end their life. The character of a firing squad execution could vary depending on whether it was public or private. In some armies, especially in the 19th century, executions were staged before assembled troops. This was intended as a deterrent, a spectacle to maintain discipline. The condemned soldier might even have their crime read aloud before the shooting. In other contexts, especially in the 20th century, Executions were carried out privately or at dawn with only a few witnesses: the squad, the officer, a doctor, and sometimes a priest or chaplain. This secrecy reflected growing discomfort with public executions and a desire to spare troops from trauma. The firing squad gained a reputation as a more honourable death, especially compared with hanging. Military traditions played into this idea. A soldier executed by firing squad often wore their uniform rather than prison clothes. Some armies allowed them to refuse a blindfold. This honour was not always granted. Those convicted of cowardice or serious betrayal might be stripped of rank or given a humiliating execution, but the perception persisted that death by bullet was more fitting for a soldier. Several notable figures met their end before a firing squad. The Austrian Emperor Maximilian I of Mexico was executed by firing squad in 1867 after being captured by Mexican Republican forces, a moment famously captured in a painting by Edouard Manet. During the First World War, British nurse Edith Cavell was executed by a German firing squad for aiding Allied soldiers' escape. In Spain in 1975, 5 members of the anti-Franco groups were shot by firing squads in one of the last uses of the method in Western Europe. These cases show how the squads were used not only for military discipline, but also for political punishment and control. By the mid-20th century, firing squads were falling out of favour as governments sought more clinical methods like the electric chair or lethal injection. However, some countries have retained it, especially in wartime and under martial law. In the United States, Utah continued to allow condemned prisoners to choose the firing squad until 2015. In Indonesia, drug traffickers are still executed in that manner, with a squad of police officers firing at the prisoner's heart from a matter of metres away. The method remains controversial. Supporters argue it is swift and certain, while critics say it is violent and traumatic for all of those involved. Medical experts note that death is not always instantaneous, especially if shots miss the heart or major arteries. While the focus of a firing squad execution is often on the condemned, the shooters themselves also experience psychological strain. Knowing they had killed a fellow soldier or human being weighed heavily, even with blanks. Some accounts describe soldiers drinking beforehand or suffering nightmares for some time afterwards. Officers who delivered the coup de grace gunshot sometimes carried that memory for life. The ritual of loading blanks served as a thin layer of comfort, but all members of the squad knew the probability was high that they had fired a lethal bullet. Execution by firing squad was a method shaped by the needs and values of armies and states. It was organised, ritualistic, and intended to be both effective and symbolic, a display of state power and military discipline. While it promised a quick and honourable death, in reality it could be messy, traumatic, and deeply controversial. Today, firing squads survive mainly as historical images: soldiers lined up, rifles at the ready, a blindfolded figure at the post. Yet behind that image lies a long history of legal process, military tradition, and human complexity. Understanding how firing squad executions works helps us see not only how states have punished, but also how they've sought to justify and ritualise the taking of a life. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.